Quartered safe out here is George MacDonald Fraser's memoir of his experiences as a young soldier in the British Army during World War II's Burma campaign. Blending humor and stark realism, Fraser vividly recounts life on the front lines, capturing the camaraderie and harsh realities of war. Let's begin. Dust and sunlight, a dry rocky plain dotted with mounds and low buns, an occasional small broken ruin, all stretching away to a distant line of shattered buildings, and beyond them, dim through the heat haze, a long gradual slope ending in a ridge. That is Pyawbye in my mind. We crossed the plain with the Japanese whiz-bangs exploding just overhead, reached the line of buildings, and the Japanese died on the long slope. My feet were killing me through all that scorching, thirsty day. That was the battle. Those are the first images, at any rate, that I see when the name of Pyawbye is mentioned. The incidents of the day come back in a rough, unconnected sequence only when I consider them at length, starting in a Burmese lavatory and ending with a long, sound sleep in a wrecked and rusty railway wagon. I shall fill them in as I come to them: the man who was sick, the row of bodies wrapped in blood-stained blankets in the lee of a little bank, the whine and crack of the Japanese 75s, remember Arroyo, the shell burst right in Morton's face which never touched him, the cool scummy depths of the well, Long John smiling and adjusting his bush hat, the sergeant who went stone deaf in the last stage of the advance, the rattle of our rapid fire as we knelt among the ancient rolling stock, the figures running and falling across our front on the slope, the long painful trudge back from the sniper's nest to the section's final position, the faint sound of shots fired by some distant Japanese optimist passing high overhead, and the Dewberry-Foster debate which brought proceedings to a close. That is my corresponding summary to the official histories. Of the preliminary activity on the preceding days, I have absolutely no recollection. We must have come down from Maektilaw to the outskirts of Pyawbye as part of Cowan's encircling movement, whereby the town was hemmed in, taking up our position for the final assault in what was to be the last set-piece battle of the Second World War. At least I know of no later one. I suppose it was the Japanese's last big organized stand. What happened in the following months was the mopping up of southern Burma. Pyawbye broke them, we took it before the monsoon, and they had no hope of turning the tide after that. The advance to Pyawbye, as detailed in the official history, is complicated, but since 9th Section played no remarkable part in it, I am content to pass it by. The Japanese were swept aside piecemeal, and took heavy casualties. Once Cowan had the town surrounded, it was a question of closing in from all sides. 9th Section's starting point in the grand design was a cluster of Burmese bashes, not big enough to be called a village, where we had dug in the night before. It was just large enough to boast a communal toilet, which I availed myself of when I came off guard duty at dawn. Burmese conveniences are curious structures, consisting of a flimsy and barely concealing cabin built on very high stilts and reached by a ladder. The cabin is the upper works, so to speak. There is a hole in the floor, and far beneath is what you might call the pan, except that there is not one, just the ground. Why the southern Burmese, for I never saw a skyscraper bog in the north, found it necessary to perform natural functions at such a dizzy height, I never discovered. Parker, who had returned to the section after his convalescence and had shared the guard duty with me, supposed that it arose from sheer laziness. The higher the structure, the less frequently it would need to be moved to a new location, for obvious reasons. He may have been right. The Burmese of the south had discovered a dimension of leisure unknown to the west. They lived in their bashes, planted their rice, ate mangoes and bananas, sat on their verandas and smoked by way of exercise, and enjoyed an existence of complete tranquility, which even a full-scale war seldom disturbed. Probably no people on earth move so slowly or so infrequently. Which could not be said of me, secluded in the cabin, when a shell burst close by. It would be hard to think of a worse place to be caught during a barrage, and I came down without recourse to the ladder and was crouching in my pit before the echo had died away. It must have been a ranging shot, for no others followed, but it was a sign of things to come, and I timed the start of the Battle of Pyawbye from that moment. Breakfast was a generous affair that day. Guessing what was ahead, the cook sergeant was lavish with the porridge, bacon, and beans. As a rule he was harassed and defensive, like all master cooks, but that morning he was solicitous, even anxious, scanning our faces as we came by the Dixies with our mess tins. Perhaps he was wondering how many of us would be queuing for supper. "Get that down you, Jock. Do you fancy a boiled egg and all, son?" Was a far cry from "I do me bloody best with the bloody stuff. What do you expect, 7 courses at the Crown and bloody mitre?" Not everyone took advantage of his bounty. One of the section, a newcomer from another regiment, was sitting on the edge of his pit, hunched up, when his buddy called me over. He was giving little gasps, holding his stomach, and looking green. "What is it, the shits?" Mild dysentery was common enough, and more of a nuisance than an illness. The genuine article, which was to become increasingly common as we went south in the monsoon, can be a killer. He shook his head, groaning, and when I pressed his lower right abdomen, he yelped. I told him to report to the medical officer and went over to tell Peel, who was falling the section in. He will have to go sick, I said. I said Forster. Sick with nerves. I said it might be appendicitis. Being from a medical family, you feel obliged to give idiotic diagnoses every so often, and Forster spat and said, I doubt it. Peel said nothing, and we moved off to the assembly point. It was not appendicitis, but I am not saying Forster was right. The man was in pain, and it would have taken an expert to determine what caused it. What was interesting was the section's indifference. Whether he was sick or scared made no odds, since either would make him an unreliable quantity in action, and it was never referred to again. They were very practical about that sort of thing, and I do not pretend to know what went on deep in their minds, for it is a highly personal matter, and they did not talk about it, much less show the least emotion. They belong to a culture in which windy is the ultimate insult, and in which the synonym for brave is mad, and that is all there is to be said about it. It was at the assembly point, or shortly after, that I saw the bodies, 3 or 4 of them, entirely covered in blankets secured by log lines. There were patches of dried blood staining the coarse khaki. My impression remains that they were not of our company. I do not remember shell fire at this time and can only suppose that they were casualties from an early skirmish. No one drew attention to the discouraging sight. Then we were moving out from under the trees onto the edge of the dry plain. It was to be a 2-company attack, with ourselves on the left, and we formed up in extended lines, a couple of 100 green-clad figures well spread out, with our platoon roughly in the middle behind the vanguard. This was not lost on Sergeant Hutton as he moved among us, making his last-minute checks. It will be heads down and keep moving today, I heard him say to Peel. And we will be the ones that catch the shit, and all, stuck in the middle. He sounded more irritable than usual, possibly because, since we had been given no replacement for Gale, he was de facto platoon commander, responsible for 30-odd men, a job which no sergeant cares for. He came across to me. Jock, keep close to the Bren, mind, when we get in. As second in command of the section, the Bren gunner and his number 2 were my immediate concern. I said I would and asked him why being in the middle of the advance was a bad thing. When Japanese artillery opens up, they will go for the middle of the target, and that is us. So keep well spread out, all of you, and keep moving. The farther you get in, the less chance there is of the whiz-bangs getting you. Right, Nick? But Nick was enjoying his pessimism, as usual. Japanese has got his eye on 9 section, he announced. Special orders for Tojo, get those buggers, my jolly little Japanese, and there is a 7-day pass for the gunner that puts a whiz-bang up Gramass. He cackled and leaned forward to shout to Gramass, in the line in front of us. Are you right, old lad? Never mind, we will all get killed. Oh fucking shut up, snapped Forster, and for once I sympathized. Nick's eternal parrot cry is not exactly what you want to hear before going in under Japanese artillery without a scrap of cover. Mind you, I would have felt there was something wrong if he had not said it. I would probably have been superstitious enough to regard it as a bad omen. We waited in the sunlit morning, listening for our own divisional artillery whose barrage would signal the start of the battle, and I was interested to find myself less nervous than I had been before we went over the Bun to the Temple Wood. It was a primitive thing, no doubt. Then there had been no one between me and the enemy position. Now there was the lead platoon ahead. I was not an old enough soldier to appreciate Hutton's warning about being in the second wave. I heard someone laugh and saw to my surprise that it was Long John, the company commander, checking his watch as he talked to the sergeant major. I could not recall hearing him laugh before. The quiet smile was more in his line, but today he was looking as though he had not a care in the world, joking with the company sergeant major. Happy as a pig in shit, muttered Hutton, and added, with a sour grin that had a deep affection behind it, he is a lad, our John. That, incidentally, is about as high a compliment as a Cumbrian soldier can pay and was a just reflection of the company's feeling. They did not give their admiration lightly, but they would not have swapped Long John for any officer in the army. He was a wildcat in action and a gentleman out of it. 40 years on, I watched him finding seats for latecomers to a memorial service in Carlisle Cathedral, mild and unobtrusive as he handed them their hymn sheets, and remembered him coming out of the dark with that bent bayonet on his rifle. The artillery opened up behind us with a thunder that made the ground shake, every gun in 17th Division throwing its high explosive at the Japanese positions far ahead. The green lines stirred and the bush hats tilted back as everyone craned to see what was happening beyond the haze, with the ritual murmurs of "Send it down, David." Whoever David might be. The bursts were invisible, but the rumble of the distant explosions came back to us in a continuous wave of sound. For 5 minutes the barrage continued, and as it died away 9 section expressed their appreciation. Is that all, for fuck's sake? Christ, I could have farted better than that. Well, that is all we are going to get, and no air cover, either. Sod that for a game of soldiers. Bloody madness. Gunners, I have shit them. Etc., etc. Actually, by their standards, it was practically a hymn of gratitude. A word of command sounded from the platoon ahead. All around, men were hitching their rifles to the trail, settling their hats, twitching pouch straps and water bottles to make sure all was secure, tapping the hilts of kukris and bayonets. The lead platoon was advancing out onto the plain, 3 extended lines of them, the right markers keeping distance from the company on our right. I am told there were Sherman's of Probbins horse somewhere, but I did not see them. We moved off in the lead platoon's wake, extending as we came into the open until there were 5 or 6 yards between each man. Nick was on my immediate right, and Stanley with the Bren on my left. A few yards ahead were Morton the Yorkshireman and Gramas, and between Gramas and the lead platoon the tall figure of the battalion chaplain, swinging along in good style with his .38 on his hip. I wondered then, and I wonder now, what the Church of England's policy was about padres who put themselves in harm's way. Giving comfort to the wounded and dying, fine, but ethical problems must surely arise if a Japanese soldier came raging out of a bunker into his reverence's path. The purple pips on the chaplain's shoulder would not mean a thing to the enemy, so, and if a padre shot a Japanese soldier, what would the harvest be, apart from 3 ringing cheers from the whole battalion? In my own church, the highly practical Scottish one, it would doubtless be classed as a work of necessity and mercy, but I was not sure about the Anglicans. If this seems an unlikely field of speculation when you are going into battle, well, my mind had been running on religion lately. I had been given the hand of fellowship by the Scots Kirk at Dealally, mainly because it would be welcome news to my father, and had accidentally strayed into a Church of England communion service at Maitila, receiving wafers and wine to which I obviously was not entitled, and escaping detection only by copying the actions of the other communicants. Also, after being an agnostic from the age of 10, I had started saying my prayers again. There is nothing like mortal danger for putting you in the mood, as Voltaire observed. It is no time to be making enemies. I came out of my reverie to realize that we had gone several hundred yards and were well out on the plain. The advance was swift but not hurried, about a regulation marching pace, and the rhythm of it, the steady tramp across the hard earth, and the companionship of those long green lines ahead and to either side produced a momentary exhilaration. Someone nearby was whistling bye-bye, Shanghai it must be Parker, somewhere to my right, and I found I was hissing it through my teeth and keeping time in my head, left right, as we strode ahead, watching Gramas's small pack bumping to the step, the dust drifting past from the boots stepping out ahead. Something exploded about 10 feet above us with an ear-splitting whine crack, the celebrated Japanese whiz-bang, better known as the 75 or 73 caliber gun. Then another and another, whiz-bang, and dust was flying among the marchers ahead, and invisible things were whistling past. They seemed to be crashing out every second now, and I found my head was flinching to each report even while my feet kept moving. People were shouting orders. No, they were not orders, really, just the automatic cries of rally and encouragement common to advancing armies since time began. Keep going. Keep moving. Do not stop. Keep spread out. Keep going. And overhead, those infernal things whined and cracked, deafening and staggering the mind if not the body. To my left, Stanley was striding on, head down, face turned like a man walking into the wind. On my right, Nick had his head hunched down on his shoulders, and I could see him swearing savagely to himself. Something went shrieking past between us. The explosion seemed to be rising to a crescendo. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man in the platoon ahead go down, and then another, stumbling onto his knees, but he was up again in a second and someone was running to the first man, who lay horribly still. Gramas staggered and let out a bellow of pain, and I thought, oh, Jesus, not Gramas, and Hutton ran past me and grabbed his elbow. You all right? You all right, man? Gramas turned, clinging to Hutton to keep his balance, then letting go to wipe his face which was plastered by dirt thrown up by a splinter. He was roaring unheard obscenities, the whining and cracking overhead blotting out the words, and then he was plunging on, and Hutton was turning, marching backward for a few steps, bellowing to make himself heard. Keep going. Keep going. Keep spread out. As I passed him, he was snarling in a justified way about how right he had been. We were in the middle, catching the shit, just as he had foretold. Whine crack, and I saw a cloud of smoke and flame erupt right in front of Morton the Yorkshireman at head height, bursting right in his face. Goner, I thought, and he shook his head without even breaking stride. About 7,000 shell splinters must have missed him, by a miracle. A deafening crash apparently on top of my hat, and I staggered, momentarily stunned, but only by the force of the explosion. Nick was staring at me, but I signaled that I was all right, and there was a man reeling away from the lead platoon, collapsing on a little bank, blood running down his face. Someone ran to him, but the fallen man, he was a corporal, with black curly hair, waved him almost savagely away, and the man ran back to the ranks. As we drew level, the corporal had dragged out his field dressing and was mopping the gash on his temple. He waved it at Nick and me and shouted, "Go and get them, friends. Remember Arroyo." "Bugger Arroyo," roared Gramas, and the corporal pulled himself up into a sitting position, and as we swung past he was trying to sing, in a harsh, unmusical croak. I ken John Peel and Ruby too, Ranter and Ringwood, Bellman and True, from a find to a check to a view, from a view to a death in the morning. He was a romantic, that one, but whoever he was, I am grateful to him, for I can say I have heard the regimental march sung, and the regimental war cry shouted, as we went in under the Japanese fire. I do not know how many casualties we took at that point, 7 dead and 33 wounded was the count at the end of the day, but I do know that the companies never stopped or even broke stride, they kept going, and I must be a bit of a romantic too, I suppose, for whenever I think back on those few minutes when the whiz-bangs caught us, and see again those unfaltering green lines swinging steadily on, one word comes into my Scottish head: Englishman. Then suddenly we were through, and the shelling stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Hutton had been right, the closer we got, the better. Only a few hundred yards of broken ground separated us from the line of ruined buildings beyond which the gradual slope began, and the Japanese guns, on the reverse slope, must already be at maximum depression. In other words, they could not shoot low enough to hit us. Then there was small arms firing to the right, and we were ordered to take up firing positions in a cluster of low hillocks. I believe, but am not certain, that the right-hand company had hit bunkers, and our advance checked while they were cleared. Anyway, we were halted long enough for an incident which I blush to record because it was too damn silly for words, but since I am writing a faithful record, I cannot very well omit it. We were lying among the hillocks, watching our front and listening to the firing on the flank and the occasional whistle of a shot overhead, cursing the blazing heat and lamenting that we had no water with us, when Gramas asked Watty for a drink from his bottle, a request answered in that comradely spirit for which 9 section was celebrated. What is wrong with your own bloody bottle? It is around back on us, you gormless egremont twit. It is lying atop me bloody ass, that is what is wrong with it. Well, unfasten the bloody thing. Look, idiot, if I undo the bloody straps I will never get them done up again. Gramas, being portly, might well have had difficulty rethreading the 2 straps from which his bottle hung below the small of his back. You want me running at bloody Japanese with my rifle in one hand and my bottle in the other? All right, I will undo it for you myself. Then we will both get a drink, out of your bottle. You miserable sod, what difference does it make whose bottle we sip from? That is what I am saying. What for should we use my bottle instead of yours? You are always on the scrounge, you guzzling big-bellied git. Right, roared Gramas. Stick your effing bottle up your ass, and I hope it gives you piles. Oh, give over, you bloody children, snapped Forster. There is a fucking well over there, with water in it. Use that and stop nattering, and keep your bottle until after. This sounded sensible since water was liable to be precious by the end of the day, and the well was in plain view just outside our position, a circular mud wall enclosing the wellhead. Gramas, however, was hygiene conscious. It will be full of shit, like that one we used last week, and found there were 2 dead Japanese in it. Bloated to buggery, they were. Well, you took no harm, said Forster. The purification pills do the trick. You have tons of the bloody things. We have not got a water container, objected Gramas. We will have to use our hats to get water. Well then, you have to shake pills to dissolve them. Who the hell is going to do that in a bush hat? That seemed to dispose of that, until Watty had his great idea. Tell you what. Why do not we put the pills in our mouths, and dissolve the buggers that way? Then we can wash them down with the water, easy. Oh, piss off. Derided Gramas. Stick them in our mouths. He gave a great guffaw. Hey, that reminds me of when Jockey Routledge was constipated. You remember Jockey, back in the 5th Battalion? A right wooden bugger. Well, he goes to the medical officer, and the orderly gives him a suppository. What do I do with this? Says Jockey. He was a right ignorant clown, though. Insert it in your rectum, my man, says the medical officer. In my what? Says Jockey. Stick it up your ass, says the orderly. Do not give me your bloody lip, says Jockey, and he walloped him, and broke his jaw, and got himself 28 days. Fuck Jockey Routledge. Are you going for the water or not? Said Forster. I am getting thirsty listening to you. I am game, said Watty, and after consultation with Peel, I made a quick dash for the well to examine its condition. I peered over the wall into the murky depths, and while it was not company's own water, I had seen worse. The surface was about 6 feet down, covered with a bright green scum no doubt rich in vitamins, but the pills should take care of that. I called to Watty and Grandmas to bring their pills, and they scuttled across. Grandmas still had doubts about swallowing the pills along with the water, but Watty braided him, insisting it was all one how they got inside him. Dissolve the bloody things in your spit, man. I have no spit. My mouth is like a Turkish wrestler's jockstrap. All right, then, let us get cracking. The difficulty was to reach the water. I lowered my hat on the end of a rifle sling, but the thing refused to sink through the emerald crust, however much I bounced and swung it. What is in this fucking well, sheep dip? Demanded Grandmas. Oh, bugger it, I have had this. It will just give us the fucking cholera, anyhow. We have got the pills, cried Watty, panting like the hart. Come on, man, give us that sling. He plumbed away, blaspheming, without success. I had already decided that whoever drank from that well, it was not going to be me. We had better pack it in, I said. Never, cried Watty, straining over the wall. Sink, you sod. Oh hell. I will get you, you varmint. Get down. But even he had to give up at last. There is nothing for it, he croaked. One of us will have to go down. They both looked at me. It will have to be you, Jock. Now I know this was the point where I should have put my foot down, and indeed I did demur, quite forcibly, but Grandmas whined that he was dehydrated, and I was his only hope. Which was true, for Watty weighed 13 stone, and Grandmas himself would have needed a cattle sling. Anyway, there was no sign of our having to advance soon, and it is difficult for a feckless youth to resist the pleadings of his elders, even when he knows they are idiots. And a good lance corporal should look after his men. Or perhaps I had got a touch of the sun. So a few seconds later I was hanging upside down just above the green surface, preparing to scoop with my hat, while Watty and Grandmas, mumbling as they chewed purification pills, held my legs. To do this, they had to stand erect, oblivious of the fact that the Japanese were still in the vicinity. In that confined space, I did not hear the machine gun opening up, but I was aware of shots smacking into the wellhead, splinters raining down, startled bellows from overhead, and of my legs being released. And that, my dears, is how Grandpa came to fall down a well during the last great battle of World War II. I took the water smoothly, sliding in rather than falling, and fortunately the shaft was wide enough for me to turn underwater and come up head first, coughing and clawing waterweed out of my eyes. After the initial shock, it was quite pleasantly cool, and I trod water while muffled shots sounded from the world above, and Grandmas announced my plight. He sounded as though he was speaking with his face pressed to earth. The section was evidently firing, and either they or the wellhead were being fired upon in return. But it was difficult to tell, and the thought crossed my mind that if the Japanese counterattacked successfully, I was going to be embarrassed. There was not a hope of climbing out, and I was just wondering how long I could tread water in heavy boots when a bush-hatted head appeared above. "What the hell are you doing?" demanded Sergeant Hutton. I try to be civil to superiors, but there are limits. "I am attacking Pyawbye by submarine," I shouted. "What the hell does it look like I am doing?" That bloody idiot Grandmas dropped me. Jesus wept. "Turn your back and they are diving down bloody wells." His head vanished, and I heard him bawling to the section to get rifle slings and get that gormless Scottish fool out before he drowns. The firing had stopped, and presently they were all hanging over the lip, helpless with mirth, asking if I needed purification pills and was the water lovely and not to piss in it or they would play war with us. To all of which I did not deign to reply. They hauled me out with the help of rifle slings, and Hutton returned raging. "Get the hell out of this before Long John sees you. You Jock, it is dozy buggers like you that turn my hair grey. Christ, Corporal Peel, if you cannot keep a better grip on your section, to hell with it. Get formed up. We are advancing." The lines were moving on again, 9 section consisting of 8 men and a pillar of cloud, or rather steam, under a sodden bush hat. I squelched for only a few minutes, for such was the heat that when the next check occurred, a Japanese sniper opened up on the left and sent us diving for cover. I was bone dry again, and raging thirsty. But for the next hour there was little time to drink or to worry about what bugs I might have absorbed during my immersion. This was the sticky time with the company on our right in trouble, and Long John saved the day by fighting us forward to outflank the objective and help the other company onto it. I should remember it clearly, but the fact is that my memories are too uncertain to attempt a coherent narrative. I can only suppose that 9 section played no significant part beyond giving covering fire, that I do remember, and a trivial incident when I was lying prone behind a little bun taking occasional shots at a rock which I had been told concealed a sniper, and a man with a wireless set came tumbling down on me. I had known him back home, and he addressed me not as Jock, but by name, Geordie, what fettle? And asked me where Long John was. I thought he was ahead and to the left, so he muttered he who hesitates is lost and darted away with his wireless set, zigzagging while I gave the rock 5 rounds rapid. He made it, and we have pints together every September with Long John and others. And some time later, we were all on our feet and going like hell for the ruins with the rusted railway line running through them. We went into them shooting, and there was an iron wagon by the tracks, half derailed, and beyond it was the long slope, with Japanese running across it. Nick jumped into the wagon, and I was on his heels. It was open on the far side, like a picture window. It might have been designed as a firing point for kneeling marksmen. All around the wagon, men were yelling with excitement, throwing themselves down on the rubble and blazing away at those running figures. Some of them must have turned to fire at us, for 2 or 3 shots clanged against the wagon. But most of them were running, and all we had to do was pick our targets. This was something new. In my previous contacts with the enemy, everything had been split-second in crisis, with nothing to do but react at speed, snap shooting, grabbing for a grenade, throwing it, shooting again. There had been no time to think. It had been scramble and shoot and hope, trying to keep cool and yet move and act like lightning, in a way like a goalmouth scramble or a rally at the net in tennis or a loose scrum near the line when the ball is like soap and there are bodies flying everywhere. But in that railway wagon, it was more like the moment when you are clear with the ball and know you have a few yards to move in and a few seconds to think about it. There was not much time, but enough, to pick a target, hang for an instant on the aim to make sure, take the first pressure according to the manual, and then the second. It was exciting, no other word for it, and no explanation needed, for honest folk. We all have kindly impulses, fostered by 2,000 years of Christian teaching, gentle Jesus, and love thy neighbor, but we have the killer instinct too, the murderous impulse of the hunter, but one must not say so. The young men going out to the Gulf felt obliged to tell the cameras that they felt nothing personal against the Iraqis, and wished them no harm, but I know, for I have felt it, that when an Iraqi came in their sights, the bloodlust would take them hot and strong. Never mind the excuse that this is what a soldier is trained for, that it is his duty, that like 007 he is licensed to kill. The truth is that he gets a kick out of it, which may be one reason why, when he is asked later, did you ever kill a Japanese, or a German or an Iraqi? He will often dodge the question. Other reasons include a decent reticence, an understandable wish not to dwell on unpleasant memories, a reluctance to be thought a braggart or a psychopath, and a sense that the question is in doubtful taste. The best answer, incidentally, is why do you want to know? That makes them think. Such considerations do not arise when the human target appears in the V of the backsight. You are just thankful for the chance and concentrate on keeping the aim steady, which is not easy when you are excited and fearful that they will get away. First pressure and second pressure is all very well for the first 5 shots, but by the time I was at the bottom of my magazine, I must have been snatching at the trigger, and Nick was pausing between shots to observe, you are firing low and left, Jock, that is it. And then suddenly pointing, as he reloaded, to a fallen figure and shouting, get that bugger, he is nothing but wounded. There are many grey areas around the Geneva Convention, I suppose. I know a sergeant from another platoon at one stage yelled, over there. They are getting the wounded away. And directed a Bren gun accordingly. A moment later he stumbled into the wagon beside us, shaking his head violently and striking his ears. I am gone deaf. I cannot hear a bloody thing. And he could not, even a rifle fired within a few feet of him was inaudible. It turned out to be a medical curiosity, a shell had burst close to him on the advance, but his hearing had been fine until he was directing fire up the slope, and had gone stone deaf in an instant. A few hours later, his hearing came back equally suddenly. Then it must have been all over, for the firing stopped and the section was reassembling among the ruins by the railway line, no one missing, no one wounded, everyone with that dazed, weary look that men wear after battle. We must have reached our objective for the day, for that was where we dug in, not far from the railway track. The derailed wagon which Nick and I had occupied became the section headquarters. I brewed up, and it was evening, and patrols were moving across the gentle slope to our front, sweeping the ground. We were hacking out our slit trenches in the stony earth and boiling out our rifles when Corporal Peel came back from company headquarters and told me to take a couple of men and have a look at a small square building away on our left front, just to make sure it was unoccupied. The last thing I needed just then was a half-mile hike over broken ground. For some days I had been suffering from that military curse, foot rot. It had been getting worse all day, and my feet felt like fiery sponges. But there it was. I took Morton, who had a Tommy gun, and Wedge, and we set off for the building, scanning right and left for wounded Japanese soldiers. There were not any. Indeed, on this flank, there was only an occasional body sprawled on the rocky earth with the flies buzzing in the dying sunlight. The patrols had swept the area, but not as far as the little square building which stood about 300 yards away on level ground where the slope petered out. It looked deserted enough, 4 broken walls and no roof, and while it was just the spot for a sniper, with a good field of fire on our forward positions, I doubted if the Japanese were in residence. I was in that resentful, footsore state where I could convince myself that this was a ridiculous, unnecessary chore. It was not reasonable, after we had had our ration of war for the day, that there should be any more to come. That is how stupid you can be when you are tired. Away to our right, there was the occasional sound of a shot, and once a rattle of Bren fire, but I approached that house knowing it would be empty, with no more precaution than signaling to Wedge and Morton to watch the sides while I went in through the ruined doorway. He was there, though, and if he had not been wounded, he would have had me. I had taken a cautious step over the broken doorframe, and was glancing left when I heard the clatter to my right, and he was rearing up from behind a pile of rubble, grabbing for his rifle. I fired, and he gave the kind of ouch that you make when you stub your toe and fell face down on the tangle of broken masonry. I whipped another round up the spout, jumping back to get my shoulders against the wall, but there was no one else in the little ruined room. His body was settling, twitching a little, then he was still. Strange, I cannot remember his face at all, but I can still see his head as he lay prone, with the grey stubble on his skull, and beside it was a small wooden plaque, which I have in a drawer somewhere. It is about the size of a visiting card, with what looks like a sacred figure among sunrays stamped on it, and a little hole which suggests it was worn on a string. One of his puttees was off, and there was a bloody rag wrapped around his wounded leg. The shot brought the other 2 at the double, Morton crying, "Is he dead?" I said he was, and Morton stepped forward and put a single shot into his back. I witnessed a similar incident later, when a dead Japanese soldier came to life after a burst from a Thompson hit him, but this one did no more than jerk with the shot. We turned him over to see if he was carrying anything, but he seemed to be just a private soldier. I had to take a moment to draw breath, feeling shaken at the unexpectedness of the thing and my own folly. Never think he cannot be there, that is when the bastard is sure to be there. And then we took a brief scout about 50 yards beyond the building, going the second mile, if you like. But that was far enough. Shock followed by relief does not cure burning feet, and I was tired enough to weep. How tired I did not realize until we were retracing our steps past the ruined building, and from far behind us there was a shot which passed overhead, the kind of distant speculative effort I had heard when I was first fired on, years ago, at Maitilo. I had been quite impressed then. Now, with my soul's hot and raging, and having had the fright of my life from the wounded Japanese soldier, and being bloody weary and hungry and thirsty and sick to death of everything, I just pulled up and looked back and gave vent to my feelings with a great roar of, "Oh, bugger off." 2 more shots came, passing harmlessly above us, and I noticed that Wedge and Morton did not even duck. It was not coolness under fire, it is just that sometimes you are so brassed off that you could not care less, and he was so far away he could not have hit a barn door with the knocker. 2 hours later everything was fine. It had been a long, dirty day, but it ended well, in a drowsy feeling of contentment. I reported finding the Japanese soldier to Peel, and I seem to remember that an observation post was being set up in the little building. I know we had no guards to stand because all through the night our patrols were busy in the no man's land in front of our positions. Peel thought that we were almost alone in having reached our objective, and that the attacks on the other sides of the town had not gone so well, but tomorrow would see the finish of it. I remember standing in a group around the fire, sipping hot tea and smoking happily, having bathed my feet and smothered them in the medical officer's foot powder, listening to the ribaldries. All the shelling and the shooting on the slope, my plunge down that blasted well, oh God, why did you give me such a talent for the ridiculous? And the horrid moment when I heard the clatter in that little room and fired by pure reflex action, and the distant sniper, all seemed a long time ago, and I was too dozent to care about them. We walked slowly back to the rusted railway wagon where we would sleep head to toe along its length, and some were already settling into their blankets while others stood in the warm gloom chatting. Watty and Wedge were arguing about the North Star, Gramas was yawning that he was about tired, and Parker was telling us about Shanghai before the war. Peel was saying he did not think we would be going in again tomorrow. As on the night after the Templewood fight, there was no talk of the battle, but neither was there the silence that had been cast then by the deaths of Gale and Little. We sensed that it had been a good day. We had got there and killed a lot of Japanese soldiers for only 10 wounded in the company. Long John had played a stormer, and the company was pleased with its commander and with itself. It was bedtime and all was well, the fight was done, and the drought and rage of extreme toil, the breathlessness and the faintness, had been soothed by supper, tea, and tobacco, and the happy warriors were settling down. "Hey, Duke," said Forster, "get your ass off the pillow." "My ass is not on your pillow, Foshy," said the Duke. "It is my feet." "Well, they stink bloody rotten. They want boiling out." "I suppose you think your feet smell like Madame du Barry's tits," said the Duke, mildly incensed, and there was a long pause. Then, "Whose tits did you say?" asked Grandmas. "Madame du Barry's." "Who the hell is she?" asked Watty. "A French king's mistress," said Peel. "Did not you see the picture?" "Mistress of one of the Louis, if you must know," said the Duke, yawning. "Which one, Jock, 14th, 15th? Dunno. Think of a number." "Shut up, you educated gits. What picture, Tomo?" "Du Barry was a lady. Lucille Ball was in it, and that red skeleton fella." "By God!" rasped Forster. "Lucille Ball. I could do with that alongside me. I would give her some stick." "Lucky Miss Ball, to be in California," murmured the Duke. "She is all right. I fancy Susanna Foster myself," said Wedge, with dreamy reverence. "Why, she is a lovely lass, that sings, and all, she cannot half twilt it." "I remember her," said the Duke. "Blonde, sort of ice maiden. Sea above top sea, very hard, clear voice. Nice legs." "Never mind bloody legs," cried Grandmas, keeping to the essentials. "What about this French woman's tits, Duke? What did they smell like?" "How the hell should I know? I was merely making a comparison with Foshy's revolting feet." "Go to sleep and dream of great tits of history," chuckled Parker. "They reckon Susanna Foster's legs are better than Marlene Dietrich's or Betty Grable's," said Wedge. "See her in Phantom of the Opera." "I have seen that film, and never saw her bloody legs," objected Watty. "She was wearing long gowns all the time." "Well, man. It was a historical picture, in the old days, in Paris. Famous for various Louis, Madame du Barry, and tits," groaned the Duke. "Why do I not keep my mouth shut? That was the film about the feller in the sewer, with a mask on his face, because he had been given the acid." "Claude Rains," said Wedge. "Claude Rains?" cried Grandmas, on a new tack. "That reminds me. Hey, Jock, did you ever read that book, The Cat's Revenge, by Claude Balls?" "I know," I said, "and The Nail in the Banisters, by R. Stornoway." Forster, naturally, knew many more titles, too obscene to mention, and that started them on limericks, each one concluded by the singing, in unison, of "That was a cute little rhyme, sing us another one, just like the other one, sing us another one, do-o-oo." It must have lulled me to sleep, for when I was awakened by Grandmas's snoring and had elbowed him into silence, the rest of the wagon was in heavy breathing repose, except for Wedge, who was muttering that Susanna Foster could have been a great opera singer, but she made more money in Hollywood, and anyhow she was better looking than Lucille Ball or Madame What's Her Name. That concludes the 7th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please consider subscribing for more episodes.